door to door in the dogleg. They touch, coming to the tri-oval down the line.
It's Richard Petty by a foot. Petty wins his 200th career NASCAR victory.
I'm going to finish up this year. I'm going to run every race there is next year. The deal is that it will be my last year next year.
From the very beginning, I felt Richard Petty was certainly going to be all the way at the top. You know, he really applied himself to the racing part of it. They made sure they had the best of equipment, but they made sure that they ran it the best it could be run. And to me, that was obvious. I looked for people to look up to. And from day one, I could look up to Richard Petty, and I could look up to the Petty operation.
Oh, I don't think there's no question about it. I think Richard Petty did for racing probably what you would say that Babe Ruth did for baseball.
Not only has he been a great competitor, you know, we've always been real good friends too, you know. And as far as I know, as long as I run with Richard and race with him, beat and bang with him and everything else, I don't reckon we've ever had a cross word against each other.
We were at Martinsville, and I was holding him up, I guess, and he bumped me and got me a little out of shape and got by. And to show you how clean he is, he moved over and motioned me back by the next lap.
The greatest incident I remember about racing with Richard Petty was in 1975. He had clearly the fastest car that day, but he split a radiator seam. The seam down the radiator split, and he could only run about 10 laps, and all the water would leave the engine. He'd have to go back in the pits and put more water in. He comes back on the racetrack right in front of me with about 12 laps to go. He pulls up on the racetrack, and he literally said, "Come on." I mean, if you want to go get the guy, let's go. And all of a sudden, he's right there. There's 3 laps to go, and the old heart starts pumping because we are going to catch him. There's not going to be much time left. We are going to catch Pearson. We come off the second corner, and here this 21 car is. David Pearson is going down to the dirt. And I said, my God, that 21 car is spinning out. You never saw the 21 car in any kind of trouble. That 21 car is spinning out. I went all the way down the back straightaway, marveling the fact that the 21 car is in trouble. I got to the third corner and said, I just won the Daytona 500. But I mean, it was through Richard Petty's help that I was able to do that, because he got me to the point that David had to make a move. He clipped Gil Yarborough.
What did this guy do that everybody likes so well? And you have to think that, well, his character, his family, his background, the way he's projected himself through the years, and that's the way I look at it. A guy he don't build that kind of reputation overnight.
Richard's always been there. And he's not the type, he'll get right up with you and rub fenders, but he's going to get his way to the front, you know, without creating any real havoc.
Well, certainly the 200th win was a milestone in auto racing, and having the President of the United States at that event was a major contribution to the sport. I doubt if any of us realized at the moment what it really meant to the sport of auto racing, and it had to be Richard Petty.
He and I were battling for the lead, and of course I was sitting right behind him, running second, and just knew I had him set up where just where I wanted him. And then caution flag came out, and I made a shot at him, but I didn't have him just like I wanted him. I would have had him the next lap, and I just didn't have enough momentum. I got by him, but I didn't have enough momentum to stay by him, and he beat me out by about a foot at the start-finish line. But that one probably stands out more, I guess. But Richard and I had a lot of good battles throughout the years, and good clean battles too. That's what it was all about.
He's run more races than anybody. He's won more races than anybody. So when he speaks to you and he tells you about something that he thinks you may ought to try to do differently or that you can improve upon, it's that knowledge. You know he has that knowledge. You know he has that experience. I think that's the difference.
When I came to North Carolina, that's where I wound up, at Kyle and Patty's house, and it took them about 3 months to get tired of me and sent me on my way. And fortunately, Linda and Richard let me move in with them, and I wound up staying there for about 9 months, and I thought I had died and gone to heaven. And you know what was the best thing for me about it was everything that everyone said about Richard, and him being so great in the fans' eyes and the media's eyes, him being such a big part of this sport. When I got home at night and we sat down on the couch to watch TV, he was still the same person. I mean, he was as genuine and as good behind the doors of his house as he is in front of the camera or to the race fans. That was one of the neatest things for me to gain an understanding for.
We ran into each other one time, and after I'd been racing for about 3 or 4 years, and you know, it's a funny thing, I was sure it was his fault, but he straightened me right out afterwards that it was my fault. I didn't argue with him, but...
Richard's never really come up to me and given me a negative piece of advice. Richard is probably one of the most positive people I know in the sport when it comes to dealing with his competitors. Even after the year that he flipped on the front straightaway and then I ran into him running through all the debris, I made tremendous contact with him and virtually was the one that hurt his leg. The next week at Richmond, he was able to come up to me and joke about it and say, you know, yeah, you bunged up my leg a little bit, but I'm going to be okay. And don't worry about it. He said, I'm all right. Don't let it bother you. That's just the kind of guy he is. He doesn't ever look at the negative or doesn't harp on the negative. He's such a positive person. It's just the right attitude to have in this sport when you're in a sport that negative is very easily overcomes your life.
Well, I think it goes back to being a Richard Petty fan is what he's done for this sport. You know, he's been a spokesman for so many years. He's been around it. He understands it. And just for anybody that can survive in this stuff and accomplish everything he's accomplished, you know, you got to look up to the guy.
When I come into Winston Cup race in 1980, you know, Richard won like $7 million and 7 championships. I said, nobody will ever beat that ever. You know, it's, times change though, and but Richard is the duly king of Winston Cup racing.
I don't think he'll be missed because he's not going anywhere. Richard Petty will still be here. He'll be here for forever, and the fans will love him just as much as a car owner as they have as a driver. Richard Petty, his light won't ever dim, I don't think.
He was a good boy. He done a few things that I found out about after he was married that I didn't know about when he was in school, but other than that, nothing mean. He used to race.
Well, I didn't like him at first. I mean, you know, he was somebody to go to the ball games with, and I really didn't think about it getting into anything serious because with him being older, I mean, you know, I thought, well, you know, this guy, he'll be here and gone, you know. Just one day out of the clear blue, he says, I'm ready to get married. He said, I think we better get married right now. And, of course, you know, I never give it a thought. At that time, I thought, if he's ready to get married, I'm ready to get married.
We were just always competitive of, you know, racing our bicycles, our little wagons down the hills and things like that. And, gosh, no, didn't have no idea in the world it was going to turn into this.
Since I was with the children, if they'd done something that needed attention, if they needed to be disciplined right then I done it. I never said to them, well, in 2 days when your dad gets home, you are going to get it. Because he was home so seldom that I never wanted to threaten them with the fact that if he walked in the door, they would be scared to death of him. I wanted him to come home, and I wanted the time that he spent with them to be quality time.
Sometimes Mama at first would say, wait till your daddy gets home. You've had it. Wait till your daddy gets home. And we would wait, and when Daddy would come home, he would give us a top of tea. You know what you did wrong? Yes, sir. Don't do it again. Yes, sir. And that was it. So Mama found out when we were young that she would have to deal with it. So she did, he didn't. Never raised his voice, ever, never. Very calm, very quiet, just like he is. What you see is the way he is.
One instance was we were in Martinsville, Virginia. He won the race, and this was back, we had an old Chrysler, had power windows. And all day long, the kids say, up and down with these windows. Well, the race was over, and it was beginning to get dark, and the infield, there could not have been more than maybe 2 or 3 cars in the infield. And finally, here he comes to the car. He gets in, turns the key, and the battery is dead as a doornail. Well, he was not happy. We had to get somebody over to charge the battery, and we finally got home. But yeah, we waited. We spent a lot of time in the car waiting on him.
I can remember being 7 years old and sitting at North Wilkesboro when there's not another car in the infield except our station wagon with my mother and my 3 sisters, and my father's sitting on a brick wall signing autographs to the last guy that comes down out of the stands. And, you know, at Martinsville and places like that, we'd be the last car to leave.
Sure, anytime you want to find Richard when a race was over, you just look for the crowd. He'd be right in the middle of it signing autographs.
I probably started going to races with the Petties in 1950 or 50, I know in 51, but back then we were kids in this community of Level Cross, and we all had bicycles. And if I come over here to play basketball or to play football, if we wanted to go to the movie, anything, before we could do it, we had to get his race car ready. And I would help, and then we could do our thing, or Lee would play basketball and football and stuff with us. But that's the way it all got started. And of course, back then, you know, they're stock cars today, but they were stock cars then, and they wasn't that much to do to them, but they were still race cars.
Talking about being afraid. Well, the first time he went to Daytona, of course, you know, he was in a convertible. And like now, I look back and I think, I would be petrified to think that he was in a car on that speedway with no top on it.
The one at Darlington in 70, I guess, was pretty bad. A car with him to get him out, and he was hanging upside down, you know, all limp in there and everything. And the car was laying on its roof. And I thought he was gone then, you know. We unhooked the belts and tried to hold him, and he made a noise when he hit the roof, you know. So I knowed he was alive, and it wasn't long before he come to, and he was waving his foot at the fans when they took him to the hospital.
I can remember him having wrecks, I mean, like at Darlington and things like that when I knew it was bad. I knew he was in the hospital, but no, it never entered my mind until I was older that it was dangerous. And now, I mean, I just worry constantly when he's out there.
I will say that my life has never been dull. It has been a learning experience from day one, and I am so thankful that I've just been a part of his life. We loved each other, and we still love each other, and we've been together 32 years, so we, you know, at that time we felt like that was all that mattered, and that's how we still feel.
What kind of a person is Richard Petty? I could probably sit here and talk to you for hours upon hours on what kind of a person he is, you know. I could steal some quotes and say he's a, you know, a man of all seasons. He's the type of guy that, you know, when my kids went to school in the morning, I'd love to see Richard Petty behind the desk teaching my boys. And this guy is just unbelievable. I mean, the more you're around him, the more you learn about him. He's the type of guy that I would love to have running the White House right now, you know. He'd make a good politician. He's just, I couldn't say enough good things about Richard Petty. You know, you talk about nothing being indispensable, right? I think that Richard Petty is indispensable. That's my way of thinking about Richard Petty.
Richard, I think, is somebody that everybody admires, not only because it's hard to do what he's done, won all the races he's won, but also the kind of person he is. I mean, it just goes before him, and that's the thing that I mean, if you want your son to kind of have a hero, I think Richard Petty would be a good one to be your hero.
Yeah, I just have so much respect for Richard Petty, period. I met Richard Petty a long time ago when I was a little kid, and yeah, I just always thought that if, you know, when I grew up and and became a man, I wanted to be just like Richard Petty. I wanted to have the same values and be the same type of person he was, because, you know, he's always was a kind individual, and he really stood for something. And it's good to see people who are so successful and they don't change as a person. And I always said if I was ever that successful, I wanted to be, you know, the same type of person.
And I used to think, you know, just watched him through the career, and as this guy grew in stature and really become the kind of guy that everybody would like to have as a hero. I mean, he's the kind of guy that always was nice and friendly to me as a little kid. I can remember as a little bitty kid, first time I ever met Richard Petty, having him say, "Come on, kid, let's go get a hot dog."
I know the phone number down there, and 100 times in the last 25 years I've called down, "Richard, you gotta, this guy's really sick. It would really help him as your fan." And Richard Petty comes through 100% of the time, and he pays for the stamps.
I think of his crash at Pocono where he broke his neck and went right back into the race car again with a broken neck. I think of his crash at Darlington where he literally knocked the wall down and got right back into the race car. His tremendous crash at Daytona where after all the end-over-end gyrations he was nailed so hard by Brett Bodine. I think anybody else would have developed an awesome terror of racing. But Richard never did. Richard was always able to get back into the car again with a smile on, with a wave for his fans, and I think that demonstrated incredible courage.
Steve Wade, who's my best friend on the circuit line, we're hunting Richard to see how he was going to be, if he was going to be able to race, and we couldn't find him. And we asked Jimmy Martin, who's an associate of Richard, "Where's Richard?" And he said, "Well, he's in a van out in the parking lot." He said, "What's he doing in a van out in the parking lot?" He said, "Well, he's got a big cast on his foot, and he's out there driving around in the parking lot at the Richmond Fairgrounds, practicing braking with that cast." So we went out there, kept looking for a van circling around, making a lot of stops, and finally here came Richard by, and we waved him down. He was hurting, and he was concentrating on seeing if he could drive the race car, but he stopped, gave us a terrific interview as usual.
I think the first encounter I ever had was just meeting, you know, how cordial he was around the garage area. You know, he seemed to kind of want to know what was going on. You know, he seemed like he'd come around and meet all the drivers at that particular time. And to me, that was kind of extraordinary for a lot of the drivers because they were always kind of doing their own thing. You know, because I know when I first started running, you know, the NASCAR stuff is, you know, he came over and talked to us and this, that, and the other, and, you know, a lot of the other drivers would.
I met Richard 34 years ago, and Richard Petty still wears the same size helmet today that he did 34 years ago.
I think what would be happening in Richard's case, and I think in my own case, is that we came up through some pretty tough times, and we appreciate the opportunities that our individual sports have given us, and you get those opportunities through the fans and through their appreciation of the sport and of our participation in that sport. So, and I think that in my case, you can't ever repay them, and I think that that's probably Richard's feeling too. For their support through the years and making my sport possible as racing. Without the fans, you really don't have a sport.
There's no question that stock car racing is as successful as it is today because of Richard Petty. He pioneered the openness that drivers have to the fans. You find that only in stock car racing. You do not find it in other forms of the sport. Richard Petty sells more tickets today than Barney Oldfield sold. I mean, Richard Petty is the world's greatest auto race ticket seller.
Richard had the bulk of the fans on his side, he really did, because they could come through the pits or he'd go through the grandstand and sign autographs, and he has always been very nice to everybody.
Well, I can tell you, I saw him many times when he was hurt. He and I think Bobby Allison, I said to Bobby one time, I'm amazed Richard just sat up on the fender in Nashville one night until the last person left the stadium. And, you know, that's a real tribute, signing autographs. And a lot of the drivers don't understand it's okay to do it when you're at your prime, but sometimes when you have a bad day, you want to go home, but Richard was always there.
And this kid was hanging on the fence at North Wilkesboro Speedway. Kept yelling for Richard to come over and talk to him. Finally, when he got a break, Richard went over and spent some time and talked to him for several minutes, 10 minutes, you know, which is a lot of time for Richard Petty to give a single individual. And turns out it was Brad Daugherty.
I met him at a relatively young age, and now when I see him again, he's the same exact person. And when I think of someone that kids ought to try to emulate and try to be like, Richard Petty always pops into my mind. I think he's just a perfect role model.
And that is why Brad Daugherty has it written in his contract with Cleveland Cavaliers that he'll wear number 43 throughout his pro basketball career.
I always felt like that our sport, stock car racing, was as good as any sport. I felt like that we were as good as football, baseball, basketball, all the rest of the ball sports. I think we are as good. Our people are as good, and the sport is as exciting. And I think through Richard Petty's help, we have let a few million people know that. And I think that he's let more million people know it than anybody else.
Well, I'm a competitor, and I'm an athlete, and numbers are important to me. And when I look at 200 wins and 7 championships, and yeah, I'm guilty of the same thing everybody else is, well, that's not in the modern era. In the modern era, he hadn't done this. In the modern era, he hadn't done that. But his longevity, one of the things that I've always been big on is consistency. Week in, week out, year in, year out. That's the kind of thing that makes a champion. And that's the kind of thing that I admire about Richard.
Brett Bodine's a Richard Petty fan for everything that he's done in the sport, from taking the time for the little kids that want to see him after the race is over and he's had a bad day, to being a friend to all his competitors, whether they might have gave him a problem that day or not. He's always treated you fair when it's over with and respected you for what you thought.
Who couldn't be a Richard Petty fan? Richard Petty is the guy that's won all the races. He's the guy with all the charm. He's the guy that says the right thing at the right time, but he doesn't put it on. It's real. It's what's on his mind. And he loves what he's doing. I love automobile racing. How could you not like Richard Petty? Sure, I'm a Richard Petty fan. Darn right I am.
Richard Petty has become a name that is absolutely synonymous with motorsport. And not only has become synonymous, I mean, lots of people become very, very well known in their particular sport, like a Dan Marino, Roger Staubach, but they don't last long. You know, they just play for a few years, 3 years, 5 years maybe, maybe 10. But I mean, Richard's been absolutely at the top for 30-odd years. I mean, he hasn't won a race for, I don't know, 8 years, 10 years. And yet, he has an incredible rooting section in the crowd, and everywhere you go, everybody's got pictures of Richard Petty in the back of their campers and on the back of their cars and old number 43. And I guess it won't stop. I think it'll carry on. I mean, he'll be retired 10 years before people realize he's gone.
The thing about Richard Petty that's Alabama has always been real conscious of image, how we treat our fans. Our fans are the most important people to us. They've given us this wonderful opportunity that a bunch of simply raised boys that really had nothing but music and a lot of desire. We achieved a lot of things, and we appreciate those fans. And one of the things that we've always heard about Richard Petty and know about Richard Petty is his sincere care about the fans. And he's aware of them, and he cares about them, and that's, besides winning the races, he's won a lot of hearts, and he's won a lot of admiration from me, and I'm sure literally millions of people all across the world because of his. There's more to Richard than a great race car driver. Well, I think the song says part of it. It says he's the best that's ever been, and I think he's the best that ever will be. And Richard's done it all. He's done it very well, and he will continue to do all that very well. He'll continue to be my hero.
1, 2, 3.
More checkered flags or won as many NASCAR championships. But Richard Petty's success on the track is only part of his story. Petty's popularity among stock car racing's fans is unmatched. He's been named the sport's most popular driver a record 9 times. All told, no driver has been more instrumental in the growth of stock car racing than its king, Richard Petty.
The deal is that it will be my last year next year, and it will be known as a fan appreciation tour.
With more than 1,000 starts and 200 wins behind him, the king decided the 1992 season would be his last. But in typical Petty style, he's devoted his last trip around the Winston Cup circuit to the fans. The Fan Appreciation Tour has been a grand success, and in the next hour, we'll take you along with Richard Petty on the final ride. Richard Petty's 35-year career as a stock car racing driver is never be broken. The achievements Petty has made on the track are remarkable, but when you combine those with his popularity among the fans, he easily becomes the most influential person in the history of stock car racing. Today, we'll pay tribute to the king of racing as he takes his final ride around the NASCAR Winston Cup circuit. Hello, everyone. I'm Mike Joy. Welcome to the Nashville Network's special presentation of Richard Petty, The Final Ride. When Richard decided last winter this would be his final season as a driver, he dedicated the entire 1992 campaign to stock car racing's loyal fans. Thus, the Fan Appreciation Tour has been a tremendous success, and over the next hour, we'll show you highlights of the tour and of Richard's remarkable 35-year career. First, let's visit with some of the folks to whom this tour is dedicated, Richard's loyal followers. Richard Petty is probably the most recognized racer in the world. A big reason for that is over the span of his career and all he's accomplished on the track, he's never forgotten his fans. That's why 1992 is the year of the Fan Appreciation Tour. After races, when other drivers are celebrating victories or licking their wounds, no matter how he finished, Richard takes time to meet his fans and sign autographs.
I guess the first race I went to, I might have signed 1 autograph. I don't even remember. You know what I mean? Then you go to the second race, you might sign 2. You go to the 5th race, you might sign 5. I don't know if I ever had a rude awakening that that was what was happening. It was just, I think from my standpoint, just made me feel really good that somebody would ask for my autograph. And, you know, once it got started, then you didn't want to quit. I mean, it still makes you feel good when somebody comes up and asks for your autograph, and I've been doing it 35 years.
Having won 200 races, 7 Daytona 500s, and 7 championships in 35 years, King Richard's developed quite a following of loyal subjects.
The fans is his number one concern, is his fans. And he'll stop and sign autographs for hours on end. Now, a lot of the other drivers will not do that.
It's just his humbleness, I guess. Doesn't show off his fame and all, and he just always has time for everybody.
Just before qualifying for the Mellow Yellow 500 at Charlotte, Richard signed his 1 millionth autograph, which is quite an accomplishment considering his signature resembles a work of art.
Well, yeah, it does take probably a little bit longer, and around the racetracks now I get where I sort of scribble around, but I've always been conscious that when you got time to, or you take time to sign an autograph, when the people get away and look at it, then you want them to be able to tell what it is. I'll make the most circles for you, okay? That's an R, believe it or not. That's it right there, guys.
With his highly polished autograph, down-home style, and sincere love for his fans, the King has certainly put the pressure on his competitors off the track as well.
Well, you got to figure Richard Petty didn't sit out and sit down one day and say, this is the way it needs to be done. He didn't do that. He just went and did his own thing, and it was accepted, okay? I didn't have to change my personality or the way I did things or the way I looked at things. And it makes me feel good that what I did was, some of it was right, because some of the people want to follow suit with it. And, you know, I've been through it, and the big deal is that when I started, there was no publicity, there was no of this stuff. But after 35 years, you get a lot of that. And so I just sort of grew along with it, and now when people come in, they say, okay, how's the best way to do it? And the only role model they got, good, bad, or different, is Richard Petty, because he's been there through it all.
Because his fans are so important to him, Richard decided it was his royal duty to pay tribute to them in his final season as a driver.
The deal is that it will be my last year next year, and it will be known as a fan appreciation tour.
But things don't always go as planned.
I had the fan appreciation tours for me to go out and talk to the people and sign autographs and take pictures and tell the people, hey, you know, I appreciate your support for 35 years. But it's amazing when you have an autograph session and stuff, and somebody stood in line 3 or 4 hours to come up and get one autograph or a picture or something like that, and they say, thank you. And I mean, you know, they've been going to races for 20 or 30 years, and then they're standing in line, they've got wet, they've got cold, they've been snowed on, you know, all this stuff, and they come up and say, thank you for doing what you wanted to do. You know what I mean? Because I've enjoyed doing it, and it really makes you feel different, I think, than, and I looked at it a little bit different now than what I did at the beginning of the year, because I realized that those people enjoyed what I did, and I enjoyed them coming, but they enjoyed me coming and putting on the show also.
It seems no matter where you turn, in any infield, at any race, you'll find encampments of Petty faithful, evidence of Richard's soaring popularity. And while it's at an all-time high right now, what would happen if Richard ever went to a track and wasn't asked for his autograph?
Yeah, I guess it would bother me, but in the long run, I think that I'd just like to go one day at it, but I don't know. I never thought about it, but I guess when you got home, you'd say, what happened? What did I do? You know, who did I make mad? So overall, it'd probably make you feel pretty bad if somebody didn't come up and ask for your autograph.
While legends live forever, the king of stock car racing is bringing his reign to an end by paying tribute to his subjects, the people who have cheered him on for the past 35 years.
Without the curly cues, here's a unique Richard Petty autograph in wet cement outside the Charlotte Motor Speedway. We're going to show you next what big shoes these are to fill when we recap some of the highlights of Richard Petty's storied 35-year career. Stay with us.
Richard Petty, The Final Ride, is brought to you by STP.
Welcome back to Richard Petty, The Final Ride. In his 35-year career, Richard started nearly 1,200 races on tracks ranging from fifth-mile dirt to the great superspeedways. There have been a lot of exciting races and thrilling finishes along the way, but it all had to start somewhere. And for Richard, as a young boy, that meant going to the races with his dad and family.
It's not just the 200 races he's won or the 7 championships or Daytona. It's all the little things that I think makes Richard Petty what he is.
But I tell you what, yeah, you know, I learned a lot from him about driving a race car. But I think what I learned from him more than driving a race car is the way he treats people.
Very few people become the standard by which all else is measured. But for the sport of stock car racing, Richard Petty holds that honor firmly in his grasp.
Yeah, this looks like it right here. Filled in a little bit. Yeah, it ain't over your ankles now. It used to be over our heads. Yeah, remember the rocks up there doing it? Then we slid down into the pool. This is it. It's just filled in over a period of years. That's where my water moccasin used to slide in over there, too, while we were swimming. Yeah, we come up the bank on this side there. We're getting poison oak again. That's where the water would come around the bend there and come over the hill and then eat out a big hole here.
On your mark, get set, go! Cheater!
What it must have been like nearly 45 years ago. The Three Musketeers of Polecat Creek. Carefree country boys with an early love for speed and competition.
We had our bicycle races, and we was probably as dedicated to them as we've always been with racing, because if we wound up with a new bike, we had to cut the fenders off every what it needed to race. At that particular time, when we first started this, my father wasn't even racing. This was back in the mid-40s. And, you know, we was 7, 8 years old, stuff like that. We started doing our bicycle racing around the house.
We tried to do a little everything to outfox the other one, even back then.
From his days of dominating the bicycle circuit at the Level Cross Speedway, Richard made the step up to four-wheel racing in Columbia, South Carolina, 1958. Richard finished sixth in that race, and it didn't take long for the King to start his reign. In 1959, he was named Rookie of the Year, and the very next season claimed his first victory at a race in Charlotte, North Carolina. That victory at Charlotte launched a decade of remarkable achievements for the King. 100 Winston Cup victories, 2 national championships, and a career year in 1967 when he tucked away 27 victories in one season, including 10 wins in a row.
Just a whole lot of luck. I mean, you know, we look at it, too, when we thought about it then and we think about it now. 1966, we had a 66 Plymouth. We had boys working on the car. Dale was chief mechanic. My brother was building the engines. I was driving the car. All right, we win a few races. I don't know how many we win. You know, 12 or 15 or whatever.
And during 1967, another superstar emerged, burning up the NASCAR stock racing circuit in America's Southeast. His name is Richard Petty.
Then we come back in 70 and 67, and we build one brand new car. Build a 67 car. We fall out of 4 races in 67, they all with that one car. All the rest of the races we finished, we run a 66 car, updated 66 car, same crew, same motor, same driver, same races. We win everything there is to win, okay? Then we come back in 68, same car, same crew, same motor, same driver. Of course, we still win 16 or 17 races, but nothing like what the 67 season was.
Dominating became a habit for Richard Petty. His 200 career wins will be tough to match, as will his charisma and the effect he's had on the sport. Petty's charm and dominance made him the man to beat. Race fans have witnessed some classic battles involving the King.
Now this is at Darlington. Last lap, white flag comes out. I go down the front straightaway. I'm leading Richard by about a car length. He whoops out behind me. We go in the first turn. We go up the hill. He comes off of turn 2, takes the lead. I come around him, get up beside him going down the back straightaway. I got a nose out front. He's on the outside going into turn 3. He goes, we run down it, run as hard as we can go. I back off the gas. Richard dives in too hard. He goes high. I dive under him. I come off of turn 4, clickety-click, clipping the wall. I won the race. Probably the most exciting race I'd ever been in my life. And not only that, one of the most gratifying, because I beat Richard, the King. And I was just a pawn at the time.
Throughout his career, Richard has conquered all types of courses, from dirt tracks to super speedway, and of course, Daytona.
But it is win number 6 in '79 that ranks among his luckiest. He was a distant third. Cale Yarborough and Donnie Allison were out front, battling for the lead.
Where will Cale make his move? He comes to the inside. Donnie Allison throws the block. Cale hits him. He slides. Donnie Allison slides. They hit again. They drive in the turn. They're hitting the wall. They're head on the wall. They slide down to the inside. Let's watch those third-place cars. They're out of it. Who is going to win it? Coming down, third place. They're coming around for the finish. Coming down, Richard Petty is now pulling out in front. Darrell Waltrip is in second. A.J. Boyd is in third. Here they come. Waltrip trying to slingshot. Petty is out in front at the line. Waltrip. Petty wins it.
Memories of the King evoke images of simplicity and excellence. It's hard to believe racing's royalty has ruled over the span of 5 decades. Even though his driving career is ending, the inspiration he's brought to the sport will succeed his reign. Our sport's seen many changes over the span of Richard's career. One of the biggest, though we may not have realized it at the time, was the elimination of dirt tracks from the Grand National Circuit in 1970. It's probably fitting that Richard won the last Grand National race on dirt, held at Raleigh, North Carolina. When we come back, we'll have a look at some of the off-track honors and accolades afforded the King in his final tour. When Petty Enterprises announced the Fan Appreciation Tour last winter, people and organizations came from all over to pay tribute to Richard's influence on the sport of stock car racing. Let's have a look at some of the honors, awards, and gifts that have been bestowed upon the King this year. Not since Kareem Abdul-Jabbar made his farewell tour around the NBA in 1989 has such a commotion been made over an athlete's retirement. Richard Petty's Fan Appreciation Tour has instead become a platform for the fans to honor the King. From pickups to parties to cake and even a condo, he's received it all. For Richard's final appearance at Daytona, they rolled out the red carpet.
Happy birthday to you.
They celebrated his 55th birthday, named a street for him, gave him a key to the city, even introduced him to the president. And after the race, Richard got a grand tour of Disney World. 3,000 miles from Daytona, Richard was invited to participate in a different sport. The Oakland A's asked the King to honor them by throwing out the first pitch for a ball game, and the King obliged.
Okay. I'm catching your ball today.
Good luck. You might have to lay down in front of it.
After the umpires and the managers meet at home plate to discuss the ground rules, we'll hold you back, and then when they clear, we'll send you out to the pitcher's mound and stand wherever you feel comfortable. Give you a baseball.
Ladies and gentlemen, please direct your attention to the pitcher's mound for the King of stock car racing, Richard Petty, will toss off today's ceremonial first pitch.
You are in a major league ballpark in front of the people, and you get to pitch the ball. And when all that comes back, you say, here's a little boy from Level Cross, North Carolina, all the way in California, pitching in the big leagues, never played baseball, played first base in high school, you know what I mean? You know, 30,000 people up there, and Richard Petty goes out and pitches his first professional pitch in, in baseball. And it made it to the plate.
Throughout the streets across America, Richard is also being revered with an honor that's usually reserved for past presidents. Although many cities have honored Richard with street signs, an 8-mile stretch of Highway 220 outside his hometown of Level Cross is extremely special.
From my standpoint, it's just a great, great day for me. Hopefully, you know, everybody won't go racing up and down the road here when they see Richard Petty's name, but...
Although Richard was always a good student, he gained most of his knowledge in on-the-job training. Nevertheless, back in April, he was presented an honorary Doctor of Humanities degree from Pfeiffer College. To Richard and wife Linda, it was this season's highest honor.
They recognize his character and his leadership in the state of North Carolina, then I just think this stands out all by itself.
This season has been an exciting and emotional one for the King, but it does present a problem for him. Where to put all his presents?
I think we're just sort of piled up in a corner right now, and when the season's over, we're going to have to, you know, sort it out and see where we're at. But, you know, we've got some big things, and we've got a humongous number of small things that you go through it so fast, you don't really get a chance to sit down and really enjoy it. And I think that'll be a good thing, like after this year, that I can go back and really sit down and enjoy that part of it.
The wide range of gifts and honors bestowed upon Richard are probably only exceeded by the range of souvenirs that follow the Fan Appreciation Tour. Seems like everybody wants a little piece of the King to remember him by. That goes for celebrities, too. Celebrities have surrounded the Fan Appreciation Tour, and Richard has been a photo opportunity for the rich and famous all season. It's been estimated that throughout his career, Richard Petty has signed more than 1 million autographs. Although he's not an autograph collector himself, this year would have been a good time to start. This season's hectic schedule has brought him face-to-face with many celebrities.
Them dudes don't see what you think.
Not happening.
Oh, man, he's looking good.
Richard's reputation precedes him at events he attends, and his unequaled success in racing has gained him respect among other athletes.
Can you sign this for this woman right up here?
Yeah, man. All right.
Good luck Sunday, too.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, I was told early on that Richard was here. In fact, I'm real disappointed. I wanted to go by a bookstore and get one of his books because I wanted him to autograph it for me. I have a collection. But, you know, I'm from the South. I've known about Richard for a long, long time. Fan of his.
But they beating bad.
Richard enjoys discussing racing's challenges with other star athletes.
Get around somebody, you just about got to hit them, or you got to wait till they go to the wall.
I see.
And most of the time, you make them go to the wall.
I understand it, but let me tell you something. You guys bump into cars. I get bumped every Sunday, too.
I know. We have got a little bit of protection, okay?
But we don't do it at 80 miles an hour.
Yeah, but you're all right till just one of them 300-pound cats hits you, right?
That's exactly right.
Over the years, some of these acquaintances have turned into special friendships.
Richard's going to be picking, I'm going to be grinning.
Yeah. I'm going to sing You Are My Sunshine.
That's probably where it came from. Richard has been a friend of mine for a long time. I haven't spent the time with him I would like to spend, but I've been down to his home and went through his shop and watched him build cars and things. And, you know, to be around the king, there's not too many people in life who have chosen a profession and has reached that pinnacle of success that Richard Petty has.
And presenting the award is a personal hero of mine, king of the race car drivers, ladies and gentlemen, Richard Petty.
Really represents something very special. Anytime you can watch the best at anything perform, it's very exciting, whether it's a tennis player or a golf player or a race car driver. So it's nice to have seen him perform in the past.
Richard Petty, one of the great Americans. Richard, I'm proud to be at your side.
Each election year, Richard finds himself in the company of a U.S. president. This year, President Bush made the trip to Daytona in hopes of seeing Richard's 201st victory. Past presidents that paid the king a visit are Ronald Reagan, Jimmy Carter, and Richard Nixon.
Don't have this many people backstage.
Richard's camaraderie with the stars has brought him many tributes. His friendship with Alabama led to a special song and video in his honor. Every week, the Fan Appreciation Tour gains momentum, and here's where it's all headed. The Hooters 500, Sunday, November 15th. Richard's final race as a driver, and it'll be preceded by a great tribute concert headlined by country music entertainer of the decade, the group Alabama. Saturday night, November 14th, in the Georgia Dome. And if you can't be there, be right here because TNN will bring it to you live. That's Saturday night beginning at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll be right back.
You started
Racing on the Winston Cup circuit puts heavy demands on a driver's time. Practice qualifying, racing, testing, and all the off-track appearances have made Richard Petty a busy man in 1992. Nonetheless, the king has found time to give his fans plenty of thrills on the speedways.
Okay, guys, let's go. Crank them up.
With those words, Richard Petty started his 35th and final season as a Winston Cup driver. Coming to Daytona for his final year, Richard was looking to add to his accomplishments, and during the Twin 125s, he had all the fans on their feet.
Well, I think we were in second in the race and beat the bull on the last lap for second or something because they had a wreck up there. But anyhow, that was a good run. The last couple of 3 times we've been to Daytona in the 125s, we've had some good runs. But the deal was that we just couldn't continue it for the 500, so kind of washed out on us.
Daytona has always been a good track for Richard, and it seemed fitting that the Florida Speedway would provide him with one of the high points on his final ride.
I guess really, if we look back on the deal, is probably qualifying second at Daytona. You know, we're not too good at qualifiers anyway, but then getting that close to pole position the very first race of the last time around. You know what I mean? And then running good in the race, led the race for 4 or 5 laps.
Here they come down off the banking to about to complete lap number 1. Who is going to have the lead? They're side by side as they come down. Richard Petty is going to lead it.
That's probably been about as highlight as we had because I think good thing I was strapped in. I think I was pretty excited in being in the car, and I think the crew was, and hopefully the people that was watching was.
While Richard hasn't had what most folks would consider a successful season, He was completing races and consistently finishing in the top 20 until Darlington.
Everything sort of comes in bunches. Good luck comes in bunches, bad luck comes in bunches, or groups or whatever.
The 92 season had highs and lows and an abundance of excitement. And as Richard looks back on his final season, one race so far stands above the rest.
Of all the races that I can remember running, there was probably more excitement built around the Winston than any race I've ever run. And I take it two different ways. It's a situation that, you know, it was a hyped-up race anyway. It's one of the races where everybody does all this and all the build-up. It's like building up for a Super Bowl, okay? All right, but the deal was that they didn't only hype it up to be a great thing, being run at night and all this kind of stuff, but the show was as good as the hype was. And then when it was all over with, the fans were sitting there just like, you know, I mean, it can't be over with, or they were just on by the whole situation because it was a heck of a race, all segments of it, right down to the crash on the last lap after the checker flag.
While he hasn't notched victory 201 yet, Richard still considers this season a success. Time for the King to take his number 43 Pontiac for one final ride. The Winston was such a memorable, magical night. And wasn't it great that two generations of Pettys could play such a large part in the event? Stay with us and we'll meet three generations of great racing drivers, all named Petty, when Richard Petty, the final ride, continues. Intimate. There are many great traditions in racing, perhaps the greatest that it is such a family sport. The legacy of great racers keeps being passed from generation to generation. We've told you how Richard was introduced to the sport by his father, Lee. And I'm sure it helped that Lee Petty was one of the sport's early pioneers and one of its first heroes. The legacies and legends, colorful characters and stories of epic go hand in hand with the world of auto racing.
I never really had a hero except probably my father. From my standpoint, I always looked, and my father drove the same way, and I looked at the standpoint and said, hey guys, you know, just leading the race or looking good during the race, that doesn't pay a whole lot. The main deal is winning the race.
The love of racing has been passed down through generations of families, along with stories that have developed a certain homespun twist. Through the years, the tales have been sweetened, bringing a little more depth and flavor to the legends of racing. The Petty family tradition stands alone, from Lee to Richard to Kyle. In racing, the Petty name is synonymous with greatness, and the trophies and championships are testimony to the fact.
No, I don't think my grandfather ever raced. I guess that wasn't before cars, but I don't think he was ever interested in racing. Really, my father, he got interested in racing because him and his brother, they worked on cars. They had a shop down there, and they always putting big motors in cars, and they was racing up and down the road and stuff like that. And then back in 47 or something like that, they built a modified. They had a 38 Plymouth or a Dodge or something and put a straight 8 Chrysler motor in it. And I think they ran 3 races. They ran a first, a second, and a third, and they lost money. So I think they decided that wasn't the business they needed to be in. But then in 1949, when they started the strictly stock Winston Cup racing, Grand National at that time, they decided they'd give it another try, so that's how he got back into it.
Lee and his brother Julie not only started a career, but a legacy. Throughout the 50s, with Lee behind the wheel and Julie handling the pit work, the Pettys ruled auto racing, winning a remarkable 48 races and 3 championships in the course of the decade. From the early days of racing his Red Flyer wagon to his first taste of organized competition, Richard's racing fortunes always seemed bright, although not necessarily from behind the wheel.
I think that, you know, as I was growing up and was around it and went to school and all that, even when I got out of school, I really didn't think that much about driving a race car. You know, Father was driving, he was winning races and championships and everything. And, you know, my ambition was to work on the car, and just from that standpoint, I was satisfied with doing what needed to be done. And when I became 18 years old, you know, like everybody else, I decided I want to try something else. Went in and asked Diddy if I could start driving. He said, "Come back when you're 21 and we'll talk about it." So I don't guess it was ever really mentioned until I got to be 21, and you know, I went in and I said, "Okay, I'm 21." He said, "There's a car over in the corner. Go get it and get it ready." So that's about the way that done.
Like a good story, the passion for racing was passed down to the third generation of Petty, but it had to compete with Kyle's desire to play high school football.
As far as Kyle's concerned, I think Kyle really wasn't that interested in driving a race car. He worked at the shop, was on the pit crew, did everything there was to do. I think he's playing football and got his knee hurt one night playing football. He was a quarterback, and I think that kind of woke him up to the fact, hey, I can get hurt doing anything. After that happened, then he went around and talked to Dale Inman in the shop and Wade Thornburg and all the boys there and said, hey, if I can talk Daddy into letting me have a car, will y'all help me work on it? You know, one of those kind of deals. So he had everything he thought figured out before he ever come to me, and you know, he said, yeah, I want to drive a race car. I said, go see Mom.
When is he ever going to grow up? And I say, never. Because why should he? His father never grew up. I mean, they're like boys that have just been able to just enjoy playing, doing what they've done all these years, and they've been happy.
A true racing family, the Pettys have embraced greatness like a friendly neighbor and have allowed the race fans to enjoy the ride. That noise in the background is Kyle Petty carrying on the family tradition. This third-generation superstar has been the man to beat at many a Winston Cup track this season, and he's been in the top 5 in the point standing as well. Welcome back to Richard Petty, the final ride. We've seen what Richard's on-track accomplishments have meant to racing and to his fans, but his influence is felt much deeper. He's pioneered or been involved in many advances that make racing much safer for everyone who goes on the racetrack. And don't forget, it was Petty who pioneered major non-auto manufacturer sponsorship into stock car racing and helped take this sport from the dusty dirt track bleachers to the high-rise superspeedways of today. In 1958, Richard Petty arrived on the NASCAR scene and helped build it into a multi-million-dollar industry. Much like Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, who resurrected a fading basketball league in the 70s and 80s, Richard changed the way people perceived the sport. He brought with him new ideas and technology to make the sport safer. He brought in new sponsors, which helped increase the growth in revenue. And most important, Richard knew from the start that the sport and his career would live and die by the people who support it, the fans.
One of my favorite examples was at Richmond, Virginia, a number of years ago, in fact, probably 10 or 15 years ago now, and the last person out of the garage area was Richard. He was over against the fence signing autographs for people that were in the infield. And when you do that for as long as Richard's done it, it's easy to see why he's got such a following.
Trouble out the back straightaway. 5, 6, 7 cars. Safety has always been the major concern of stock car racers, and Richard has been dedicated to improving these conditions. Richard and his crew helped develop and test Goodyear's new safety Interliner tire, designed to minimize the chance of a blowout. After dislocating his shoulder in a crash at Darlington, Richard helped develop the window net and the Petty bar, designed for added protection on the driver's side of the car.
I think a lot of it's just self-survival, and you know, first thing I was going to think about was my own self. And you know, naturally you wanted the car to run good and all this stuff, but you wanted to be able to have the driver to drive it the next time. And so you know, as you run along and you get real hot, then you say, okay, we got to figure out some way to cool this car down. Or you have a wreck and you dislocate a shoulder and you say, okay, I got to do something here to prevent that from happening again.
Richard's new ideas were not limited to safety. In 1964, he was the first driver to dominate with Chrysler's new 426 Hemi engine, outlawed by NASCAR the next season. Richard was among the first drivers to understand the true effects of drafting, slipstreaming, and slingshotting, using the air off other cars to maintain horsepower in reserve.
If you don't like the looks of your car, shoot it with Son of a Gun Protected from STP.
In 1972, Richard changed the sport forever with one of the first non-car manufacturer sponsors. Under the guidance of promotional genius Andy Granatelli, STP teamed up with Richard to form one of the greatest sponsorship tandems in the history of sport.
Andy Granatelli, STP, and Richard Petty, it was a relationship that was briefly made in heaven, I can tell you that now. Andy being the dynamic promoter that he was, and of course STP being a small company but yet a very visible company, and then signing a guy up like Richard Petty. I mean, it was just unbelievable. I mean, he became our #1 salesman almost immediately.
His fan appeal has increased gate and TV revenues by millions of dollars and has brought sponsorship involvement to unheard of levels. His dedication and influence helped change this sport from small-town dirt track racing to the country's #1 spectator sport.
Richard Petty has been one of the most faithful, and I've said it a million times. If it had been 25 Richard Pettys involved in the sport, I don't know where it would have gone today, because he's been the most dedicated driver of any race driver I've ever met, barring none of them. Nobody's been dedicated to the sport like he has been.
Richard may be modest about those accomplishments, but every driver that pulls down a window net, reaches for a fresh air supply, or enjoys the safety of the inner liners in today's stock car racing tires owes a debt of gratitude to Richard Petty. When we come back, we'll gaze into Richard's crystal ball and take a look at his racing future.
Richard Petty, The Final Ride, is brought to you by STP.
Although Richard will put his helmet on the shelf at the end of 1992, he's by no means retiring from racing. That tall profile with the cowboy hat and the sunglasses will still be an imposing figure on the Winston Cup circuit for years to come. Let's have a look ahead into the future for Richard Petty. Atlanta Motor Speedway and the Hooters 500, the place where a chapter in history will come to a close. For when Richard cuts off the engine, takes off his helmet, and climbs out of his Pontiac, the days of Richard Petty, race driver, will be over. While he might not be behind the wheel, Richard will still be at the track in a new position, full-time car owner.
Well, I tell you, it's going to be a completely different year for me. I'm going into uncharted land for Richard Petty. The fans and the press is going to approach me from the driver, not from the driver's standpoint, but from how is your driver doing, or how is your sponsor going, or, you know, so all that stuff, it'll just have to happen, and when it happens, I'll just do the best I can with it.
While some questions have been answered, there are a lot that still remain concerning the crew, sponsor, driver, and even what'll happen to the number on Richard's car.
I would like to retire the 43 number from Petty Enterprises. And I think if we just said, okay, we're not going to use the number, I think it'd be a few years before any other car owner would want to pick the number up. So it'd sort of be retired automatically. But anyhow, we got to look at it from, I guess we look at it from the financial standpoint now. Is it better for us to stay with the 43 from the sponsor standpoint and stuff because it's been established all this long? Or is it better, like I said before, close the book on Richard Petty, 43, Petty Enterprise, and open a new book and start all over again? So I think probably it'll wind up being whatever the sponsors want to do about as much as what Richard Petty wants to do.
While Richard will talk about certain aspects of next year's team, when it comes to who will slip into the driver's seat, he's being tight-lipped. No announcement is scheduled until after season's end, although there's been some speculation. At first, people thought Kyle would climb back in a Petty car.
I like driving for Felix. I like driving for Mello Yallo. I like the team I'm with. You know, we've just begun to gel a little bit and run a whole lot better. And, you know, it's tough changing teams and stuff getting going again. So, and on top of that, I don't want to be the next person in line behind Richard Petty. That'd be like going to Alabama after Barry Bryant or UCLA after John Wooten, and that's not my style.
Whoever the driver will be, he'll have a tough task. Following in the footsteps of a legend won't be easy, especially when everyone will want to hold the new driver up to the standards set by Richard Petty.
No matter who it is, if they get in there, the press and the people, the fans and stuff are going to try to compare him with Richard Petty, which is not fair to Richard Petty, and it's not going to be fair to the driver, but it will happen. So you'll have to get somebody sort of grin and bear it for a while. I think once we get into the season and once we get established from that standpoint, I think that part of it will go away. But I think probably the first 2 or 3 months, it might be pretty tough on them.
For a man who's lived and breathed only racing for the past 35 years, Richard's cautiously looking to next year and having time to explore life away from the track.
I hope I got some spare time to think about doing something with. Right now, I hadn't. I don't really know. Where I get away now, I got about 500 acres of land over there. I got about 10 or 12 miles of trails and stuff, and I get on my four-wheeler and just go away from everybody.
While he might be trading the wheel of his number 43 Pontiac for the wheel of a tractor, you know whenever there's a race, you won't have to look far to see the hat, sunglasses, and familiar smile of Richard Petty. As one long chapter in the Richard Petty stories has but 2 gilt-edged pages to turn, another is set to unfold. I'm Mike Joy. Thanks for joining us. There are 2 races left on Richard's Fan Appreciation Tour. Next, live exclusive coverage on the Nashville Network of the Pyroil 500 from Phoenix International Raceway. And then in 2 weeks, Saturday night, November 14th at 7 p.m., Alabama.
What a race weekend. Like so many others, and yet like no other. The familiar crowds, everyone seeking an autograph, an endless chain of ceremonies, the occasional special dedication. And finally, the big race itself, starring the King, Richard Petty. November 15th, 1992, Richard saddled up old number 43 for the 1185th time. But this time, it's different. The career that spanned generations ends here. Imagine the memories this last time in the cockpit that was his sanctuary from the crowd and the cameras. And now memories are all that remain. Spectacular to the end, Richard's exit scene was a fireworks display. But they fixed his car after this big crash, and he took that final checker. The thud in mid-race and the fire that followed were not enough to keep the King from ending his day in style. If indeed life is a canvas we fill with our own brush, then Richard Petty is a Rembrandt among racers. His life story, an intricate and colorful masterpiece. Its title, very simple. Portrait of a King is presented by the First Brands Corporation.
Impressive array of Sam Bass images of Richard Petty provide the backdrop for our Portrait of a King. Hello, everyone. I'm Dave Despain. We welcome you. It is now official. Richard Petty's career as a driver is over. He is the only man in sport whose retirement could have created all the fuss that we've seen here today and indeed all season long. The phenomenon begs for comparison. I'm reminded of Jabbar's last campaign, all those emotional tributes in arenas that he played for the final time. But there's a big difference. Basketball was there before Kareem hit the boards. Stock car racing is entirely a product of Richard Petty's lifetime. From the motorized backwoods brawls that lured his daddy to the current love affair with the Fortune 500, Richard has lived and breathed the creation of the sport. He is its biggest star, indeed, its embodiment. And having given us so much, now he's given us the Fan Appreciation Tour.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Richard. Happy birthday to you.
we have reached the end of Richard Petty's driving career. Our racing masterpiece we'll admire in detail when we come back. Portrait of a King is presented by the First Brands Corporation, the makers of STP gas treatment.
Today, we thank you the best way we can as we dedicate this portion of US 220 to you and publicly mark your achievements. I never started out to set records, never thought about setting records. I just went out and did what I wanted to do and was real fortunate to be able to do what I did. And in the meantime, the records came along.
All right, Richard, I'll buy that. You didn't set out to rewrite the stock car record book. It just happened that way. But those records are important here because they are the milestones. And one by one, they mark the path that Richard traveled from gangly North Carolina kid to the king of stock car racing to something more than that. Let's go to John Kernan in our nation's capital.
Here in Washington, D.C., where this museum, the Smithsonian, houses some of our country's greatest milestones, Richard is also included, along with pieces of Americana that have helped shape our nation's history. As the car that accomplished win number 200 back in 1984 sits quietly in this hall, its presence here truly puts into perspective the enormity of Richard's achievements.
Richard recorded his first historic achievement back in May 1967 as he notched career win number 55, bypassing his father's record of 54. Not even a famed Darlington stripe could stop Richard from cashing in the money that day, although his father Lee was there in victory lane to help him pick up the check. But the victory celebration was far from over that season. Teaming with brother Maurice, the Petty boys ran off with an unbelievable 27 wins that year, including 10 in a row. Records that still stand today and likely will never be challenged.
That particular record of 27 wins in, 47 races or 46 races, whatever we run, they don't run that many races now. You know, some of the records and stuff that might be completely out of the realm of possibility because the circumstances now and the system is so much different than what it was when I came through.
As the 60s came to a close, America focused on the unknowns of space exploration as man walked on the moon. Meanwhile, in North Carolina, Richard Petty was exploring his own uncharted territory, picking up career win number 100.
In Bowman Gray Stadium in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, 1969, quarter-mile flat asphalt track around the football field.
As the years passed, Petty continued his exploration of the unknown, logging his 100,000th mile in 1972 at Ontario. And some 11 years later, a young cable network got a thrill of its own, covering a little bit of history. Bob Jenkins makes the call.
Bill Elliott from Dawsonville, Georgia, looking for his first win onto the Tri-Oval. Still, Richard Petty leads the way as we have 2 laps to go. This is the final lap at Rockingham, less than a mile to go. Here they come toward the 4th turn, and the start-finish line coming up. Bill Elliott will make one desperate attempt as he goes to the inside. Richard Petty holds him off, and Richard Petty picks up a victory at Rockingham, North Carolina Motor Speedway, his first since 1981, and the crowd celebrates with King Richard. It's been a long time since he was in victory lane, and ESPN has brought you his victory live this afternoon.
It was emotional for me. I told them I was glad I had my sunglasses on where they couldn't see how emotional I got. But when your daughters do something like that in front of all the people, and it's like I say, it's thousands start. That was a big, another one of our big days.
It's Richard Petty. He revs up the STP Pontiac. Yarborough hounding him. It's just nose to tail on the back straightaway.
Up ahead, 5 slower cars as they move for turn number 3. Yarborough now dives to the inside, tries to get inside the STP Pontiac. He's not there. Now he is up beside Richard Petty as they hit turn 3.
Yarborough down low. Petty's up the banking. Yarborough pulls up in front of him. Petty right up on his bumper, points his nose down inside. They race back to the checkers. The lap car ahead. Petty right down to the apron. They're side by side.
Richard drafts down to the bottom of the racetrack. They are door to door in the dog leg. They touch coming to the Tri-Oval down to the line. It's Richard Petty by a foot. Petty wins his 200th career NASCAR victory.
The only record I ever really wanted was the 200th one, and that when I got it, I couldn't couldn't do no more, but that was the only one that I really, really tried to get.
Richard Petty really is one of our country's great pioneers, truly deserving of his place in American history.
If I set a goal and got to it, I didn't set it high enough, and then if I set one and never did get it, then I was always going to be disappointed. But I always looked at the situation of saying, you know, let's just do better today than we did yesterday, and I always felt like we'd go forward that way. Bit of blue that was left over from a 55 Dodge, and I had some white left over from a 57 Chevrolet. And you know, if we mixed it together, it was going to be enough paint to paint the car. So we mixed it together, and we probably had a gallon of paint, a gallon and a half, whatever it took to paint the car. Had enough paint to paint the car. We got through and said, hey man, that's pretty. The sunglasses came about when we used to run a lot of dirt tracks and stuff. I wore those bubble goggles, and they kept getting sweaty and to get dust in behind them and stuff. And, you know, again, my eyes were always sensitive to light, so I got to wearing sunglasses. And then I got to wearing them in the race car. And I got this particular kind that was wrapped around that, you know, the wind would go around them and you didn't sweat in them anyway. They'd get dirty, but you wouldn't sweat. And then the hat and stuff, I guess it came about probably in the early 70s, somewhere along there. Just got in the habit of wearing a cowboy hat. It was one of those deals where if I had a STP hat on, I was talking to the Pontiac people, or if I was talking to the Pontiac people, I had a Goodyear hat on, or talking to Goodyear people, I had a Goodies hat on. So, you know, it just kind of messed up stuff. So I just got in the habit of wearing a hat, and kind of worked out good. Works out good if the sun's shining, or works out good if it's raining. We got with STP in 1972, and you know, up until then, I was real fortunate that most of the time we had factory backing, so we sent a car on to Riverside, and myself and Dale Inman and my brother Maurice went by Chicago to see Andy about a sponsorship. Now this is like 3 days before the race, before the season started. I mean, that's how business oriented we were. You know, everything worked out.
An STP paint job, a pair of shades, and a cowboy hat. We could add to that list and find here in Sam Bass's paintings the rag between the teeth, boots in place of fancy driving shoes, and of course that big number 43. Forget the crown and the scepter. The reign of Richard Petty is marked by symbols unique to this particular king. And there's one more stock car icon synonymous with the Petty name. Just as Yankee Stadium became the house that Babe Ruth built, so too did the most famous track in Richard's sport emerge as his personal domain. Let's go there now and hear from Dr. Jerry Punch.
In IndyCar racing, it's the Brickyard. In stock car racing, there is no more hallowed ground than Daytona International Speedway. Many drivers will complete their careers without ever once visiting Victory Lane here at the World Center of Racing. One man and one man only has won the Daytona 500 7 times. We're talking about the king, Richard Petty. So who better to name an achievement award for accomplishments here at Daytona than this man? You know, millions of fans have enjoyed his accomplishments week after week, but it takes a fellow competitor to really understand how difficult those achievements actually were.
In 1964, I was in my 5th year of stock car racing, and Richard was entering his 7th. And what took me 16 years later to accomplish, Richard Petty did that February.
When he won that Daytona 500 in 1964, that's when it, and under very adverse conditions, that's when I thought, hey, this guy's got something. And despite having a lot of tire trouble and having to make an extra pit stop, he kept his cool and won the race.
In 1966, Richard won his 2nd Daytona 500 in a rain-shortened race. He would go on to win the Daytona 500 6 times before I'd end up in victory lane. But one of my best early shots A victory came when I was teammates with Richard in 1971.
Richard Petty, Random, North Carolina, has won the Daytona 500 for the third time.
Richard Petty wins.
All right, Petty is coming around to take the checkers in the battle for the second place. We'll go all the way around the speedway one more time. Here come those cars fighting for second across the line. There's the checker round, and the STP Dodge of Richard Petty has won the Daytona 500.
They're out of turn 2. They're down the backstretch. Here goes Cale on the inside. Cale makes the move. He's down very close to the grass. Down he tries to shut him off. Cale's in the grass. Cale loses it. He tries to pull it back. Down he side by side. They make contact. Both head toward the wall. They hit the wall in turn number 3. We'll have a new leader.
Here they come to the stripe. Richard Petty's STP Oldsmobile. Waltrip dives to the inside. Petty almost put him off in the grass, and Richard Petty will win the Daytona 500.
1980 was finally my year at Daytona. But in 1981, the man who challenged Richard was Bobby Allison.
In 1978, I won my first Daytona 500. While in 1980, I finished second to Buddy. So in 1981, I was ready for victory number 2 in the 500. But Richard was looking for his 7th. And when it was all over, it came down to pit strategy. The team leaders were telling me, you know, we got to run easy, we got to go easy. And I was saying we need to go ahead and go when we ran out of gas. Richard Petty was sitting there, pitted at the proper time, and coasting around that racetrack out of gas is what cost the race.
In this Richard Petty's final year of competition, racetracks all across the country have added thousands of these seats. And even that wasn't enough to accommodate the millions of fans who wanted their chance to say farewell to the King. Ironically, many of those fans weren't even born when Richard Petty won his first of 7 Winston Cup championships.
The year was 1964. Lyndon B. Johnson was president, but a youthful Richard Petty was about to establish himself as the king. Over the next 11 years, the victories mounted and the championships followed. But it was his 7th and final title, won with an incredible comeback over a young Darrell Waltrip that remains his most cherished.
That was a dramatic situation, coming back from not doing good the year before and then coming back all the way that year and then winding up winning the championship. So it was a very gratifying championship.
In many sports, stardom is flickering. It goes as quickly as it comes. Arguably, no other sports legend has impacted their sport this century as much as Richard Petty. Throughout his career, which spans some 5 decades, the legend of the King has been witnessed and enjoyed by generation after generation. And although he may no longer drive, in the hearts of millions of fans, long will live the King.
During his farewell season, Richard Petty's career has been recounted, undoubtedly embellished, and his presence has been endlessly hyped. Richard, for one, and I, for two, will be glad to see the end of the hype. Point is, if we judge this career by what's been said in the last 12 months, there wouldn't be a wart in sight. And in fact, what Richard said a long time ago was, it ain't always pretty. Amid all the highlights, there were also controversial run-ins with other drivers, complaints that the Pettys were the privileged haves in a world of have-nots. There was, do I dare say, cheating in the context of the King. Call it creative interpretation of the rules. And worst of all, there were those crashes. Benny Parsons has some thoughts on the bad times.
You're right, Dave. Richard Petty has had many bad things happen to him, but a lot of good things as well. Probably none better when they dedicated the statue to the King. But Richard Petty, like most race car drivers, remember the bad things much better than the good. He'll probably never forget Darlington, 1970.
That was one of the worst wrecks I had. Broke the steer and the car come down to the inside, turned over 4 or 5 times, and my arm kept coming out the window, and looked, it really, really looked bad. When we got to him, the car was upside down, and his arms, you know, he's long and lanky, and his arm was just limp laying in the car, and you know, the first thing I thought that he was dead, you know, and of course I'm in the car with him, and when I unstrapped the belts and we're trying to hold him, you know, a big lanky body like that, he hit pretty hard when he did come down. And
he groaned, and so I knew he was alive.
The 1976 Daytona 500, a classic Petty-David Pearson battle, results in the ugliest but most memorable finish in history.
As they hit the banking, they're three abreast with the lap car. Pearson moves in front of the STP Dodge. Petty comes back to the inside. They almost touch as they move down low in the banking. They're going to be side by side as they exit the bank and head for the finish line.
Richard Petty goes back in front. They both spin. They're in the wall. Petty is slamming into the wall. He's coming down toward the finish line. Will he make it? He's still moving. The car stops 300, 400 feet shy of the finish line. Pearson is still running. Here's Petty trying to fire to come across the line. David Pearson moving down through as they come to the stripe. The winner is car number 21.
At the time, he didn't know it, but he had me beat. If he hadn't come over and we hit, people want to know if I was mad, and I said no. I remember exactly what I said. I said, no, I'm not mad. But if I hadn't won the race, I believe it would have been,
After Pearson, Richard's biggest rivalry came with Bobby Allison.
There were times when he wanted to run on the same part of the racetrack that I wanted to run on.
Exactly.
And somehow, I was able to get my car up to a good enough speed that I could be there on that part of the racetrack that he wanted to be on, where a lot of the other guys couldn't keep up. And, that did put us at each other frequently, almost constantly. One of the enjoyments that I've had along the way is being able to be a pain in the neck to Richard Petty.
There were younger challengers, including Darrell Waltrip, who learned some hard lessons from the King fast.
Well, you can see it happening right before you. They're coming to turn 3. 2 more turns to go. Richard Petty still side by side. Donnie Allison is still hanging in third. Oh! Petty has got the lead. There comes Waltrip down below him as Petty stood up high. Donnie Allison trying to move past Petty into second place. They're coming to the finish line. It is Darrell Waltrip winning the Rebel 500. Petty is second.
I didn't get the full impact of what Richard Petty meant to this sport or who he was until I actually started to compete in it. When I stepped it up a notch and I got to run in that crowd, I was a little bit eager. That's when I really got to know Richard on a personal basis, and I'm talking like up close and personal, He got the longest. Get him to show you this finger right here sometime. He can stand 4 feet away from you and poke you in the chest with this finger, and it's crooked. I don't know whatever happened to it, but when he comes up to you and he takes that long finger and starts pointing you in the chest, poking you in the chest, and looking at you through those dark glasses, there's some beady little eyes in behind them little dark glasses, I'm here to tell you.
I watched him on the truck. I stand in the infield and watch him race, and never thought I'd be racing against him. And then here I am in a race car at Charlotte Motor Speedway, and I'm fighting this big Dodge and running about 29th or 30th, and everything's all lovely in my little world. And by the time Richard Petty goes by me at about 100 mile an hour faster than I'm running, scares me to death. And, you realize who he is and what he's doing. That was the first race he ever won at Charlotte, too. It was the first race I ever drove there.
The Petty name managed to escape most controversy until win number 198 at Charlotte.
Bill France runs NASCAR, and he comes in and he starts talking. Says, okay, so, they got you on this tire deal. So we're going to have to work out something here, have penalize you and fine you and all that. I said, okay, so they was working on something. And Dad Gumphy didn't call up there and say, hey, guys, your motor's a little bit big here. And man, we just both throwed up our hands in. I said, oh, me. I said, we're in deep trouble here.
It was a tough call to make, but it had to be made. And we did not put the engine, when I say we, NASCAR, did not put the engine in the car, nor the tires on the car. I really hate it for Richard and Maurice, but somebody in the organization had to make the call, and they got called.
Perhaps the King's darkest moment came in 1988 when the hushed Daytona crowd thought they may have seen the last of the King.
They were replaying it on a closed circuit TV, and I stopped, and all at once it hit me that this was Richard in this car, and it was just flipping and coming apart, and even when it stopped in the middle of the track, he took a tremendous impact again. And I thought, the first thought in my mind was that they're not being truthful here. I know he must be dead. I walked back to the area where they had brought him in, and there he lay. And he smiled, and there was not a scratch on his body.
Gentlemen, start your engines.
Then in 1992, the King's final days at the Speedway almost resulted in a pole position, but one driver had other ideas.
And look at the King. He has pulled alongside the pace car, carrying the president, and they're saluting each other. President Bush with the thumbs up to King Richard Petty as he slides back now into his starting position outside the front row alongside Sterling Marlin.
We could have got the pole. I'd really love to see him got it. And, you know, our bunch worked real hard on our Speedway stuff. And I knew it was going to be close the first lap he ran. And I don't know if I beat him or not. And sure enough, when I come back around, the crowd was booing, so I knew I'd beat him.
They go 2 by 2 through the banking in turns 3 and 4. Petty to the inside, Sterling Marlin to the outside. Here they come down off the banking to about to complete lap number 1. Who is going to have the lead? They're side by side as they come down. Richard Petty is going to lead it.
That's magic, Ned. Yes, sir. That was great.
If I try, I will surely finish one day, one night with you.
Richard Petty grew up in Level Cross, a wide spot on the road to Randleman, North Carolina. His Carolina small-town heritage shaped every facet of his character and shaped them permanently. His friends then are his friends now. You and I may lift him onto a pedestal, seat him on a throne, but the guy is really the king of the common man. From the family race shop, Richard's boyhood environment, here's ESPN stock car analyst Ned Jarrett.
This is where it all began, Petty Enterprises. Today, it's a high-tech racing facility. But some 40 years ago, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears were shed between those walls as men worked 24 hours a day to build race cars for Lee Petty. Then sons Maurice and Richard Petty would carry the torch as they tried to follow their dreams in auto racing.
It all began on February 28, 1960, when a man named Dick Petty won his first race.
When I first started running, a lot of the press did call me Dick. It's just an automatic nickname for Richard. And I don't know, they did that for a little while after I started running, and then I think I won a race or two, and it was Dick Petty won the race. And I think Mother found 3 or 4 reporters together one day, and she just went up to him and said, if I'd want him called Dick, I would have named him Dick. His name is Richard, and I want to see his name put down as Richard. So after that, it's always been Richard.
With guidance from his dad, Lee, Richard's career began to evolve. Lee took the first Daytona 500 in 1959. 5 years later, in 1964, Richard won his first Daytona 500. He also went on to take his first Grand National title that year while following in his father's footsteps and bringing the Petty name to a new level in auto racing.
As Richard's career evolved, he never lost sight of his roots in Randleman or the people who were always there to support him.
A newly dedicated statue watches over the streets of Randleman, North Carolina, as the citizens of that town show their thanks to their favorite son, the former Randleman High athlete who woke up their quiet town.
As most people say, Richard has put Randleman on the map. And when you go anywhere, people say, where are you from? And we'll say, we're from Randleman. That's where apparently Richard Petty went to school and grew up, you know, so he's really put Randleman on the map.
He's probably the coolest athlete that it's ever been in the history of the world. I mean, he hadn't changed, and he's worked at keeping this level of knowing, you know, where he came from.
Not only has he given a lot of money to things in the area, but he's also had events that caused him to be able to raise money for themselves, too. And I think they all probably realize they owe him a big debt of gratitude.
Some things never change in Richard's day, like lunch at Frank and Larry's.
He doesn't order. When he walks in, we just take 2 hot dogs and a pint of milk to him. That's what he gets every time. He likes everything on it. I'm glad I've had the chance to be around him, talk to him. I've enjoyed it.
One of the King's best friends' most prized memories came on the playing fields where they grew up at Randleman High. Richard always knew how to make a sad situation better.
Fought this battle with cancer, and they amputated my leg. I go on my crutches to this game, and you know, everybody is so pitiful, you know, poor Ronnie and all this stuff. And, you know, I couldn't stand that. And anyway, I was sitting up there in the stands, and here comes Richard, comes up. It's the first time he'd seen me since I got out of hospital. He said, well, Ronnie, he says, cut it off kind of short, didn't he? He's done good. You can't tell Richard nothing. He's already figured it out, and he knows how to retire. He knows how to race. He knows how to be a family man. And you can't tell him nothing. I mean, you know, he don't need to be told nothing. I mean, you know, he's Richard.
Child arrived just the other day. He came to the world in the usual way, but there were planes to catch and bills to pay. He learned to walk while I was away, and he was talking for I knew it. And as he grew, he'd say, I'm gonna be like you, Dad. You know I'm gonna be like you.
This is the house my parents lived in when they were first married. I lived there for a little while. When they first got married, they worked really hard to make things better for them, better for us as we grew up. But like I've said before, you know, it was a normal childhood. It was just like anybody else's. Until I was 9 or 10 years old, I thought everybody's parents had a race car. You know, we spent a lot of time at racetracks, a lot of time following Richard Petty around the racetrack. But I think the most special time we spent together was around the dinner table.
As you can tell from previous interviews, my kitchen has changed quite a lot. But this kitchen holds a lot of good memories for our family. When we first moved into the home, we had a small table in the corner, and this was where, at our meals, we shared the events of the day. The children were always telling us about their day at school. Richard was telling us about his day in the shop. And on Mondays, we always shared the events of the day before the previous race.
Well, as far as I was concerned, it was normal. You know, we grew up, our father wasn't there a lot of the time. He was always gone to racetracks and stuff like that. But, you know, we had a normal childhood. I've got 3 sisters, 3 younger sisters. We all went to school down here in Randleman. We all did all the things that everybody else did.
We would go to the track, and we would play around. We knew Daddy was out there racing, but we really didn't pay attention. You know, at the end of the day, Mom would say, okay, come on, load up, it's time to go, or come on, let's go to Winter Circle, and we would run to the Winter Circle, and, you know, it was fun, but I don't think it hit us that he had won the race. I mean, I didn't know what that meant.
Christmas here is, I mean, it's wonderful. And nobody's as big a kid as Daddy himself. I mean, he thinks he's Santa Claus, and it just makes him happy to make everybody else happy. I guess as far as childhood, I had the happiest that anybody could ever dream of having. It was just like Disneyland at our house. I mean, it was just a fun place, a fun time, and always happy, always going, always doing, just, you know, my whole memory of my childhood is just a dream.
They see him in a different light. They see a side of Richard Petty that the public doesn't see. And they are very defensive. I mean, if they read any bad press, if they hear anything said bad, oh, they want to respond to me like, that is not how our dad is, they say.
They just perceive me as plain old Richard Petty, plain old Daddy, and let it go at that. I don't think that they see me as special as what the fans see me. They might see me special, but in a different light.
Those of you expecting to see Virginia Slim's tennis, stay tuned. That action from Philadelphia following this ESPN special. You're watching live as the sun sets on the historic day of Richard Petty's last ride. Portrait of a King is presented by First Brands Corporation. You know, every pundit in racing and many more outside the sport have taken the opportunity in the past year to have their say about the King. That's well and good. He deserves the accolades. But the most interesting perception of the King is that of the King himself. Let's begin with the matter of how he got that nickname.
I think that came about about 1966 or 67. We'd had a couple of real good years there, and everything was working good. And I think 3 or 4 of the regular reporters, maybe more, probably out drinking one night. Anyhow, they got to talking about it. And, you know, different people had different nicknames. They'd nickname Pearson and a couple of others. You know, that Fireball had a nickname. You know, there was just different situations. Gentleman Ned, you know, all this kind of stuff. And so I think they just got to talking about it, and they said, you know, we got to come up with Rapid Richard or some kind of a name. And so I don't know, one of them said something about King Richard. And, you know, if my name had been Joe or Bill, it couldn't have been King Bill or King Joe. My name was right to go with King. I don't know if anybody will ever come along with the circumstances as good as what Richard Petty did. I think that's the key when you really look down to it, really deep down, that the opportunity, the situation, the personality, circumstances, all was for Richard Petty. It was very progressive, what I did, but it was all a natural trait. I never really set out to accomplish anything. I never set out to accomplish the popularity part, signing autographs, or any of this kind of stuff. I just did it, and as the demand came, I just went along with the demand. I never said, time out, this is as far as we're going to go. I think I'm very satisfied. I don't know that I'd do anything over again, Ned. I think I come along at the right time, at the right place, under the right circumstances to be able to live a life that I wanted to live. I think one of the key philosophies is treat people like you'd like to be treated. I try to do that with the fans. I try to do that with the sponsors. I try to do that with the press. I look at other people the way I want them to look at me, and vice versa. So I'm going to have a different philosophy now in racing. And my philosophy is win races as a car owner. I've been very fortunate to have a pretty good driving career and have a good record in that. And what I want to do is close the book on Richard Petty, race car driver, and open the book to Richard Petty, car owner. And hopefully I can have a successful career as Richard Petty, the car owner.
The jammed infield. The King's minions turned out in record numbers today to see his final ride, and they may be part of the all-time record Georgia traffic jam. Some of them will be here for a long, long time, but what they saw today was certainly well worth it. Portrait of a King is presented by First Brands Corporation, makers of STP gas treatment, and in part by Smooth Bush Beer and easy drinking Bush Light, and by Goodyear, #1 in tires. You know, kings once crowned typically rule for life. Turning over the driving chores doesn't mean Richard is abdicating his throne. But he's reached the final milestone as a driver, and so it's time to think about how we're going to remember this guy. I'll remember him 3 ways. 1, he didn't plan any of this. He just did his best and let the chips fall. 2, he lived the golden rule, and for a race driver, that's not always easy. And 3, he has great taste in hats and glasses. His colleagues, friends, and family will add the final few brush strokes to our portrait of a king. I'm Dave Despain. So long, everyone.
In 1964, Richard Petty won the Daytona 500 for the very first time and qualified a stock car Plymouth almost 175 miles per hour. He was the biggest news in stock car racing. In August of 1964, I ran my first Grand National race. I was in awe of everyone there. But one fellow walked up to my car, stuck out his hand, and said, "Hi, I'm Richard Petty." I'll never forget it.
You think about the idea, well, maybe he's getting too much credit, or, you know, maybe somebody else didn't get enough or something like that. But you only have to think about it a few minutes and you say, no, he earned it. He's earned every bit. And what he did was good for the sport. It wasn't just good for Richard Petty.
I'm just thankful to have had the father that I've had. And I've had the kind of life that any daughter could ever dreamed of. And I just want to say how proud I am of my father and that I love him very much.
Thank you. Thank you for thank you for the values that you've given to us. Thank you for the wonderful father that you have been. And thank you for being the person that you are. And I love you.
One of the things that impresses me most about Richard Petty is the fact that after 7 championships, 200 wins, and all the other things that he accomplished in the sport, that he hasn't changed. He's still the same Richard Petty that I remember racing against for the first time in 1959. And I'm so happy that the 6.5 years that I spent driving race cars were during a part of his career.
I think to me, not only in racing, but in my personal life and growing up, that Richard Petty meant everything to me. He taught me everything I know, whether it's driving a race car, how to deal with fans, how to treat people. And I think in that aspect, you can't separate Richard Petty from Linda Petty. They're both the same as far as that goes. And they both just gave us a good set of values to grow up on. And, you know, I can't think of any other way to thank them except say I love them.
I just wanted to say how proud and honored I am to have been a part of Richard Petty's life, and that I'll get all choked up, and that he really is my hero.
I don't know why my path crossed with Richard Petty, but it did. And I'm just so thankful that I've been a part of his life.
In the
Hi, folks, and welcome back to my place and a very special episode of Neil Bonnet's Winners. I'm Rusty Wallace. For as many decades as most people can remember, when they thought of NASCAR, the first person who comes to mind is Richard Petty. It's an honor and a true pleasure to host our show about Richard Petty. Richard Petty today, tomorrow, and yesterday. Richard Petty can boast 200 wins, more than 500 consecutive races, and more stitches cast in operations than an entire hospital ward. He's become a symbol of daring and skill for fans of all sports.
We have to have a leader. You've always got to have that rabbit out there for everybody to chase.
For 35 years, he lived in the heat and smoke of a driver's seat, 200 miles per hour, millions of dollars on the line. Today, out from behind the wheel, the life of Richard Petty is still the very story of NASCAR, of Winston Cup, of winning.
I've been fortunate to have so many highs, win, lose, or draw.
So there he was, screaming down the straightaways and around the turns, sometimes busted up, sometimes broken down, but mostly running flat out into the hearts of anyone who ever listened to an engine purr. That was Richard Petty, driver. Now, for several years since retiring as a wheelman, there's been a new King Richard. Car owner, team leader, teacher, and yes, political activist. Later, we'll see how he firmly believes his homegrown views are being welcomed by more and more NASCAR fans. And when Winters returns, the inside story of how this Winston Cup road warrior made his emotional transition from car to curbside.
Neil, look up to him. I mean, I'm 34 years old, and when I run into problems out here in a race car, even though he's not driving, I go and ask him the answers.
Even though he's retired as a race car driver, fans still react with excitement whenever Richard Petty makes an appearance. In 1992, he announced he was calling it quits as a driver. And Richard Petty didn't go out quietly. Just months before he waved a final goodbye to his legions of fans, Richard Petty, the old warrior of a Winston Cup, got this terrifying reminder of the dangers around every turn of the track.
You know, I said, maybe I don't need to be doing this. But probably the big deciding factor on the whole thing was that we was not succeeding in what we were going to do.
7 times King Richard's car flipped on the Daytona blacktop. Still inside number 43, the spinning Petty waited for the sounds of crunching metal to stop. While Daytona wasn't the first time he wrecked a race car, it was a dramatic reminder it was time to start dealing with retirement.
The deal was I'd sit down and said, one of these days, the sponsors and the racing people are going to say, hey, he's just out there for the fun of it. So I said, I better back out of this.
Some fun. But for a man who's broken 24 bones, is 75% deaf from race noise, and is missing a very large part of his insides, Richard Petty walked away uninjured that day. Another part of the King Richard legend was born. Here he is now, moving down pit road on 2 legs, not 4 tires. Richard Petty, the car owner. When he finally climbed out of the driver's seat, he had a season-long farewell tour that drew thousands of loyal fans to racetracks nationwide. Even knowing it was time to say goodbye was a carefully thought-out decision.
I think probably as much as anything, it was Richard Petty sitting down and saying, okay, how do we get out of this after 35 years and make a graceful exit, because we hadn't been winning anything in the last 5 or 6 years. So how do you make an exit that's graceful enough to go along with the good years that you did have?
Richard left with the respect and admiration of followers and fans who now see him in a role he's not altogether comfortable with.
Before, I could just jump in the car and go run it. I knew what the car was doing. I could come in and tell the boys what to do. Then I'd have an interpretation, and it wasn't necessarily the right one, so I've had to learn to back out of that and let the crew and the driver work more of that out. So that was a big transition. I think the big thing that watching races and stuff, the first race or 2 was terrible. And then as time progresses, you get more and more away from the driving, so you learn to back away from that and accept your position in the racing team.
There's more than his personal adjustment to the new Team Petty. There's the constant demand that every Winston Cup competitor feels, the simple pressure to win. As easy as it was to win all those years behind the wheel, now it's a weekly struggle for the man behind the team's checkbook. Just what will it take to make his team a winner again?
If I knew we'd do it, I don't know. I've got a lot of dedicated boys, got a dedicated driver. You know, they're all working toward that point. The deal is that this group that I had together, there's not but 3 or 4 of them that's ever been there. And until you get there, you don't really know what it takes to get there. Once you get there, in other words, we go out and win a race, then we know what it takes to win a race. It's going to be easier to win the next time.
While his team digs in and waits for their wins, Richard's retirement has made winners out of his family and his wife, Linda. That last race in Atlanta told the story.
We had trouble. I got in the truck there during the race while they was working on the car, and they all got in there and they was all crying, and they was crying because they was happy, but they was crying because they was sad, because they knew it was my last race. So they had all kinds of mixed emotion. But when it was all over and said and done, they loved me to drive the race car. They loved it because they knew I really liked it. But then they knew how much I was going to miss it. And so, like I say, it was a mixed-up deal. But Linda learned to live through all that stuff, and she kept kicking me out of bed, getting me out there, and getting me to do it. So we finally got through it. Now I think she is really it's really took a load off her.
When Winters returns, Richard Petty on NASCAR Racing, where it's been, where it is, and where it's going.
People come up and wanted an autograph. He was always able to put himself in that position. What if that was me going up to Babe Ruth? Or what if that was me going up to Joe DiMaggio? He always wanted to be like those guys and aspired to be like those guys, and he always put himself in the fans' place. So I think that's why the fans kind of took to him, and I think that's why he's such a great guy.
It seems that just about everything concerning Richard Petty is bigger than life. His hats are fancier, his boots are shinier, his cigars burn brighter, and he has more confidence than any human ought to have. You might just say that Richard Petty's racing career simply started in another era, another time. And you might say it, but words just aren't good enough to describe those low-tech, short-money, barnstorming days when stock cars were only a few steps removed from moonshine getaways.
You know, it's got to be more technical. Okay, everything is technical. Used to, we had one chief mechanic, and he painted the car, and he built the motor, and he set the car up, and he drug it to the racetrack, and, you know, maybe had a couple of helpers. Now you've got an individual that works on the rear ends, an individual that works on the front ends when it does the body work, you know, 4 or 5 in the engine room. You got everybody is sort of a specialist in their field.
Richard Petty seen the changes all right, invented a few himself, if the truth be told.
I started messing around with the race cars when I was like 11 years old, I guess. And that's 1949. That's when my father started. As far as I was concerned, he was the only race car driver in the world. All them other people just got in his way.
It was a time when stock car racing was just past infancy, when Junior Johnson and Fireball Roberts were heroes to young men all over the South. Richard Petty wanted to be part of their world, his father's world, racing. There was only one difference. Petty's big money run for the riches had very little in common with those early NASCAR days.
That's the problem with so many of you drivers today. They want to drive for money. I mean, you go back to some of the deals that we came through with David Pearson and Buddy Baker and Cale Yarborough and Bobby Allison. Hey, man, as long as they had something to eat, that's as far as they wanted to get. You know, I mean, they wanted to get further, don't get me wrong, but they was happy because they loved the competition. They would have run if they didn't pay them nothing.
And Petty, who's been known to sign 600 autographs a day, free of charge, sounds as if those dollar signs have taken a little bit of the heart out of racing.
These people here drive now to make money. They don't drive because they love to do. I mean, you have a heck of a time getting them in the car to go out and practice or go test or something. Hey, man, I ain't got time. Are you paying anything to test? You got to have the right attitude to be a race car driver and to be a winning race car driver. And money is not the driving force that's going to make you a winning race car driver.
One thing in racing, Richard says, hasn't changed in 30 years.
We have to have a leader. You've always got to have that rabbit out there for everybody to chase. You know, back in the early 70s or late 60s, early 70s or mid-70s, they wanted the 2 or 3 cars that was capable of winning race. When they qualified this race, and you look at it and you look at it and you say, man, there's 20 people running within, you know, 20 or 30 100s of each other, and all of them's capable of winning. All of them's not capable of winning. If you go back down through that thing and you pick it out, and then after they run 100 miles or 200, then those same 3 or 4 people, they're going to be the ones that you got to beat.
So, why our fascination? Why do thousands of new fans pay to go to the racetracks every year?
The TV, I think, has been the exposure. I think when we started getting on all the TVs and, you know, started doing live broadcasts and stuff, that gives us the exposure. When we got the exposure, then that gives corporations chances to come in and put money into the sport. And as they put money into the sport, then that made better competitors. And then it goes back to the people that see it on TV.
Richard walks the range where his buffalo roam on its expansive spread in Level Cross, North Carolina. And oh, don't forget the sheep. Today, the new log cabin he's building is Richard's #1 passion.
They want to know how high I wanted the porch. I sat down and I said, so that I could just walk up to it and sit down. I said, that's how high I want it. That's what they did. This will be the main room. This whole wall will be rock.
You can hear the pride in his voice as he describes the plan room by room.
Then over here we've got a loft. There's some steps going up over there, and there'll be for one bed or whatever they want to do, sleeping bags or whatever how they want to do it. This part here was a barn, old barn, and the boys tore it down and moved it, I guess from Denver, North Carolina. That's where it really came from, where most of it came from. And back in here, we'll have a bathroom here, which will be logs all the way around it, and then back over in the corner will be the kitchen, be an eating place here. So when you come in, you'll not see any of the modern conveniences till you walk on in here. And then we got the back porch. And,
You gotta have a back porch. You gotta have a back porch.
Well, this is what you use. Front porch is, if you got time, you go out there and sit. The back porch is where you do all the business stuff. So we've got a place here, we're gonna fix a place for the wood and stuff. And over on that side there, she wanted a couple of pans where we could wash our face. I mean, whatever, you know how bucket deal and stuff. So anyhow, that's what we're doing.
Looks more like a house than a cabin, and Richard admits that. Come on, the 8 grandkids have to have a place to spend the night.
Where I'm really lost is at the racetrack. At the shop, I can go out and work on a car or piddle with a car. When I'm off on the road, I can think about it and stuff like that. But when you actually get to the racetrack, and then you're not involved in the car, after 35 years of being mainly the main cog in the wheel, I'm just sort of a spoke over on the side now, and that's kind of hard to take from time to time. It's been a very, very rewarding life, and I don't know if I could have, if I went back to do it again, there wouldn't be a whole lot I'd change, because I'd be afraid I'd mess it up worse than what I did to begin with.
And when Winters comes back, Richard's new direction, from the driver's seat to politics, with down-home leadership.
Where he feels like that, okay, he's had fun all his life. He's been a kid for 55 years, 56, 57 years. Now it's time to give something back to society.
If you think the legend of Richard Petty is just a little bit overblown, think again. We're actually talking about a guy who not only holds 7 driving championships, but is known to ask his dentist to hold the Novocaine, make unauthorized hospital escapes, and once raced with a broken neck. For decades, he was consistently on the move. Richard would go for days without sleep, food, or thought of anything except his team and his race. But now, he's got something new to think about.
What we need in government is we need some business people that have run businesses, that understand that if you've got $100, you don't spend $200. You spend $100. That's all you can spend.
Government and Richard Petty? What about carbs and cams and qualifying? Make way for the other King Richard. For over 16 years, a county commissioner in his home state of North Carolina. He's also the namesake of a political action committee and a fellow who's not afraid of speaking out for basic conservative causes.
And Thomas Jefferson and all those boys sit down and they said, okay, guys, the only reason we're having a government, the only reason is to fortify 13 colonies that's not big enough to take care of themselves. Okay, because somebody could come in and take them one at a time. If we all join together, we make the United States, then the first priority is defense. Don't tell them people how to run North Carolina. Don't tell them how to run New Jersey or New York. Hey, that's their business. Let them run it like they're supposed to.
Right now, Richard's concentrating on helping candidates he agrees with, using a political action committee that bears his name.
And as quick as we announce that, then the first thing they do is everybody says, yeah, you're going to run for governor. I said, wait a minute. I mean, that's from 1996, I think. That's a long way off. But right now, I'm not really looking at at that part of it. I'm just looking around and seeing how the waters are flowing and what's happening right now.
His opposition to many social welfare programs and big government in general is very clear indeed.
I'm just not a strong believer in just because he's born in the United States, the government's supposed to take care of him. The world don't work that way.
The world, according to Teddy, works because of hard work, family values, and the same desire for excellence that made him famous for so many years.
I'm not trying to sell my deal on you if you're not wanting it, don't want it. But I think there's a lot of people out there that would be interested in some of the same things that I am interested in.
Interested in what Richard Petty has to say? Even those who disagree with him pay close attention just because he's an American legend. Whether he's driving a race car or in government, King Richard will always be larger than life, no matter how you look at him. Thanks for joining us today. For Neil Bonnet's Winners, I'm Rusty Wallace. You won't miss me. I'll be the guy out front, I hope.
Neil Bonnet.